in which our lovers begin to learn the consequences of their actions. Chapter 7. While Stepan Arkadyevich, having taken almost all the money there was in the house, went to Petersburg to fulfill the most natural and necessary duty known to all who serve in the government, though incomprehensible to those who do not, and without which it is impossible to serve, that of reminding the ministry of himself, and in going about the fulfillment of this duty, spent his time merrily and pleasantly at the races, and in summer houses. Dolly moved with the children to their country estate in order to reduce expenses as much as possible. She moved to her dowry estate, Yergushovo, the same one where the wood had been sold in spring, and which was about 35 miles from Levin's Pokrovskoe. In Yergushovo, the big old house had been torn down long ago, and the prince had refurbished and enlarged the wing. Some 20 years ago, when Dolly was still a child, the wing had been roomy and comfortable, though it stood, as all wings do, sideways to the front drive in the south. But this wing was now old and decayed. When Stepan Arkadyevich had gone to sell the wood in the spring, Dolly had asked him to look it over and order the necessary repairs. Stepan Arkadyevich, who, like all guilty husbands, was very solicitous of his wife's comfort, looked the house over himself, and gave orders about everything he thought necessary. To his mind, there was a need to reupholster all the furniture with cretonne, to hang curtains, to clean up the garden, make a little bridge by the pond, and plant flowers. But he forgot many other necessary things, the lack of which tormented Darya Alexandrovna. Hard as Stepan Arkadyevich tried to be a solicitous father and husband, he never could remember that he had a wife and children. He had a bachelor's taste, and they alone guided him. On returning to Moscow, he proudly announced to his wife that everything was ready, that the house would be a little joy, and that he strongly advised her to go. For Stepan Arkadyevich, his wife's departure to the country was very agreeable in all respects, good for the children, less expensive, and freer for him. And Darya Alexandrovna considered a move to the country for the summer necessary for the children, especially for the little girl, who could not get over her scarlet fever, and also as a way of being rid of petty humiliations, paltry debts to the woodmonger, the fishmonger, the shoemaker, which tormented her. On top of that, the departure also pleased her because she dreamed of enticing her sister Kitty, who was to return from abroad in midsummer, and for whom bathing had been prescribed, to join her there. Kitty had written to her from the spa that nothing could be more to her liking than to spend the summer with Dolly in Yergushovo, so filled with childhood memories for them both. At first, country life was very difficult for Dolly. She had lived in the country in childhood, and had been left with the impression that the country was salvation from all city troubles, that life there, though not elegant, Dolly was easily reconciled to that, was cheap and comfortable. Everything was there, everything was cheap, everything could be had, and it was good for the children. But now, coming to the country as mistress, she saw that it was not at all what she had thought. The day after their arrival there was torrential rain, and during the night there were leaks in the corridor in the children's room, so that the beds had to be moved to the living room. There was no cook in the household. Of the 9 cows, according to the dairymaid, some were with calf, some had dropped their first calf, some were too old, some were hard-uddered. There was not enough butter and milk even for the children. There were no eggs. No chicken could be found. They had to roast and boil old, purple, sinewy roosters. No woman could be found to wash the floors. Everyone was in the potato fields. To go for a drive was impossible because one of the horses was restive and pulled at the shaft. There was nowhere to bathe. The entire riverbank was trampled by cattle and open to the road. It was even impossible to go for a walk, because cattle got into the garden through the broken fence, and there was one terrible bull who bellowed and therefore probably would also charge. There were no proper wardrobes, such as there would not close, or else opened whenever someone passed by. No pots or crocks, no tub for laundry, not even an ironing board in the maids' quarters. At first, instead of peace and quiet, finding herself in what, for her, were terrible calamities, Darya Alexandrovna was in despair. She bustled about with all her strength, felt the hopelessness of her situation, and constantly kept back the tears that welled up in her eyes. The manager, a former cavalry sergeant whom Stepan Arkadyevich liked and had promoted from hall porter for his handsome and respectful appearance, took no share in Darya Alexandrovna's calamities, said respectfully, "Impossible, ma'am, such nasty folk," and did nothing to help. The situation seemed hopeless, but there was in the Oblonsky house, as in all family houses, one inconspicuous but most important and useful person, Matryonya Filimonovna. She calmed her mistress, assured her everything would shape up. It was her phrase, and it was from her that Matvey had taken it, and without haste or excitement went into action herself. She immediately got in with the steward's wife, and on the first day had tea with her and the steward under the acacias, and discussed everything. Soon there was a Matryona Filimonovna club established under the acacias, and here, through this club, which consisted of the steward's wife, the village headman, and the clerk, the difficulties of life began gradually to be put right, and within a week everything, indeed, shaped up. The roof was repaired, a cook was found, a female crony of the headman's. Chickens were bought, the cows began to produce milk, the garden was fenced with pickets, the carpenter made a washboard, the wardrobes were furnished with hooks and no longer opened at will. An ironing board wrapped in military flannel lay between a chair arm and a chest of drawers, and the maids' quarters began to smell of hot irons. "Well, there, and you kept despairing," said Matryona Filimonovna, pointing to the ironing board. They even constructed a bathing house out of straw mats. Lily started bathing, and Darya Alexandrovna's expectations of a comfortable, if not calm, country life at least came partly true. With 6 children, Darya Alexandrovna could not be calm. One got sick, another might get sick, a third lacked something, a fourth showed signs of bad character, and so on and so on. Rarely would there be short periods of calm, but these troubles and anxieties were for Darya Alexandrovna the only possible happiness. Had it not been for them, she would have remained alone with her thoughts of her husband, who did not love her. But besides that, however painful the mother's fear of illness, the illnesses themselves, and the distress at seeing signs of bad inclinations in her children, the children themselves repaid her griefs with small joys. These joys were so small that they could not be seen, like gold in the sand, and in her bad moments she saw only griefs, only sand. But there were also good moments when she saw only joys, only gold. Now, in her country solitude, she was more aware of these joys. Often, looking at them, she made every possible effort to convince herself that she was mistaken, that as a mother she was partial to her children. All the same, she could not but tell herself that she had lovely children, all 6 of them, each in a different way, but such as rarely happens, and she was happy in them, and proud of them. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.